Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Caroline Hoy, and I'm with Well Said Labs. If this is your first time coming to one of our webinars, I would encourage you to go to our website, check out wellsaidlabs.com, and you can sign up for a free trial and try out these amazing voices that we're going to be talking a little bit about today. I'm very excited to have our guest, Risa Aaron, who is the founder of XpertPatient. And we're going to be talking a lot today about how we can use these incredible voices to create better experiences for our audience, for our customers, for patients. And Risa has some really unique insights into how we can use this information to create as much information retention as we can with the people we're talking to. Risa, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you for that, Caroline. My passion for great audience experiences actually goes back to when I first started out. I worked with amazing brands, American Express and Delta and Nike. And what stood out for me was that these brands, they're not just selling a product per se. We all love their products, but what keeps people engaged and what keeps people really loyal is the emotional connection, right? They're really joining and basically connecting with people in a very different way than most brands. After spending quite a bit of time there, I went to something a little closer to my heart. I pivoted to healthcare. And what I really wanted to do was pour all of those learnings on how to engage different audiences in different ways and using data and insights and whatnot to really start to help some of these new treatments and drugs that are coming out better engage with their audiences, be it the doctor or the nurse or the patients. And so I've been fortunate enough, and I've been helping launch for the last, I guess, 10 plus years now, some of the biggest brands out there for a variety of different pharma companies. But more than just launching the brand, it's about, helping them really connect with different audiences in ways that they just haven't traditionally done that. And so it's been, for me, this really amazing opportunity to take something that I'm really passionate about and start to help patients really get, at the end of the day, get to a better place, which really led me to my passion project, which is XpertPatient.com.
Wonderful. We are so excited to hear your story through all of that today. Before we really dig in, I just wanted to go over the things that we're going to cover today with Risa. First, we're going to hear that story about how she founded Expert Patient and her background, how it contributed to the elements that she put in place there. Then we want to talk a little bit about why voice is so helpful for that information retention portion of the conversation, a little bit about the research in this area, things that are well established that we know affect the patient experience, the customer experience, and anytime we are trying to convey information like this. And then finally, we're going to have some ideas and opportunities that Risa sees where all of us, no matter what your subject matter or your audience, could be using voice a bit better. And I do just want to say before we start, please enter your questions in the chat area. We're going to get to those as best we can, maybe a little throughout, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A session. And then also we will be sending a replay recording in the next few days. So if you need to hop off for any reason, don't worry. We're going to get you all of this helpful information. All right. So Risa, let's hear more about how this background that you have with these pharma companies and, healthcare marketing, how did that really prepare you or get you to the point where you started Expert Patient, and what is Expert Patient?
No, thank you, Caroline. Yeah. So Expert Patient is a website basically that has been intricately designed. And while I'm here today, I have these amazing partners from really around the world. I've been partnering with patients and doctors and nurses and caregivers to really understand the different, insights and situations that they've lived through. It's a very unique space. Expert Patient is focused on cancer patients. But what I realized in working with all the pharma brands is that there's been this incredible advancement in medicine, right? In treatment, we see the news all the time. There's precision medicine, there's personalized medicine, and it's amazing. And one of the things I realized though is that from a patient education perspective, that there's just not that same parallel. There's not that advancement in patient education. While recently there's been more video content and things like that being made available, from a personalization perspective, we still see blocks and blocks of text, unfortunately, complex areas trying to be described. But it's incredibly difficult for particularly the cancer patient who's overwhelmed to really break it down. And what was really hard for me to sort of sit by and watch is that we know, and there's tons and tons of evidence now that shows, if we can educate patients, if we can help them understand their diagnosis a little bit better, help them understand their different treatment options, then we know they actually get to a better place from a treatment result perspective, even in the cancer space. People have said to me recently, even cancer, and the answer is yes. So the likelihood of someone being a little bit less anxious, feeling more in control, actually starting treatment, staying on treatment, all of these things increase if we can get patients to, and individuals and caregivers, to really support the patient in becoming more educated. And so that for me was a huge, flag, a huge opportunity. But on the other side of that, what became really interesting, discouraging and encouraging, I suppose, at the same time, is that while people are becoming more, and I actually posted about this today, active in their health decisions, it really is in the context of diet and exercise and things like that. But when it comes to treatment decisions, people are still shying away from being an active participant. And that's a really big deal. If you think about, we can truly change lives if we can get people to participate in treatment decision conversations, but 60% of the folks are still not doing that. Like, there's this big disconnect that that we really need to all work together. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a number of folks to start XpertPatient, but I feel like everybody can play a role in helping to break some of that down. For me, the interesting part about it, and this is a little bit of a diversion, but we spend so much time comparing, what phone should I get? What car should I get? We spend hours and hours doing all of this research, investments. There's a million different examples. But when it comes to treatment decisions, there's just a little bit of a different mindset. There's still this reliance on the doctor, which there always should be a collaboration with the doctor. But we're truly on a mission to help people say, hey, I want to be part of that conversation because I know it's going to help me get to a better place.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there can be a real hesitancy to ask the questions. Can you please repeat that? Can we, in that patient relationship sometimes, I mean, like you said, there's people have a lot of emotions going into it, and it's complicated. So it can be very intimidating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
incredibly intimidating. And the unfortunate part is most of us, either personally or through family members or close friends, are going through something, particularly in the cancer realm. And so, when people ask me, what's the urgency? I said, this is urgent. This is an urgent matter, and we need to start to really take a look at this and do things a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Anyone, if you have questions as we go, I see a hand raised. I think that's Faith, my colleague. If you can go ahead and put that in the chat, we'll get to those as we go. So Risa, let's take a look at XpertPatient itself and kind of understand where you or how you thought through conveying the information. I know it's important to have a mix of different formats. So let's just hop over here to the website. If anyone would like to check this out, I highly recommend it. It's fascinating. XpertPatient.com. Let's see. We had talked about maybe.
Caroline, you can just let's pause for just a second. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, so thinking back to the brands that I worked on, the really large consumer brands, we spent a lot of time thinking through and even researching color palette, tonality, imagery, and things like that. The essence behind XpertPatient is everything about it is supposed to help the newly diagnosed cancer patient just take a pause, take a moment, and give them sort of that opportunity to say, yeah, honestly, this sucks, but I'm going to be okay. And this is a platform that can help me through it because they understand what I'm going through. And so we spent a lot of time talking to different, people on the spectrum, people that have been, diagnosed or currently going through treatment. They're what I call thrivers, if you will. They've made it through and they're doing incredibly well, to really think through what this looks like, but also from a tonality perspective. But the other piece of it is personalized care, right? Everybody on the consumer side, we do personalized marketing and things like that. When you go to the WebMD or the hospital that you go to, their cancer site or things like that, there's a ton of great information. The thing is that's really unique here is that an individual has one cancer diagnosis. They have a cancer type and they have a cancer stage. They're in a completely overwhelmed state. And so the idea here is, as quickly as we can, we want to get them to content that's really relevant to them, because they can barely focus on their everyday. And the idea here is that we're going to bring them into diagnosis content. If they're still a little bit unsure of the conversation they had with their doctor, that's going to support them and let them work through their diagnosis at their own pace. So if you click on here, you could go to learn about my diagnosis for melanoma is great. I think we were just on that. That's great. Just yeah. And so again, really getting to what that particular individual needs. We actually go a little bit deeper. But so we have a very specific flow to the content from a learning perspective, breaking it down to truly help individuals learn what they need to know sort of in the right sequence. Once you understand what you have, then you can start to think about your treatment options. But before you understand what you have and what's going on in your body, it's really too early to start thinking about that. Once you come in here, the other piece that we've recognized is that cancer is super complex. When we've all probably or planned for going to another country, we get out the guide, we try to learn the language, we take 3 months, 6 months. With cancer, it's a new language and you need to learn it tomorrow. And literally your life is depending on it at this point. So what we've tried to do is recognize that, break it down from a flow perspective, but also understand that there's different ways that adults learn. And this is where we start to, and we're thrilled to be partnering with Well Said Labs. Myself, I actually like to read text and I take notes. I've got a bazillion pencils on my desk, which is not the norm anymore, I've heard. Video content has become really popular. But as you can see in the world of cancer, there's also a lot of complex imagery. We've got these amazing illustrations done by a pretty renowned medical illustrator. But again, it's super complex to go through on your own. So we've taken the opportunity to partner with Well Said Labs and use some of the voiceover technology to actually give people a tour of the content to really help them understand what they're looking at. So if you hit listen now, you'll see
Stage 2 melanoma affects the skin only and has not spread to lymph nodes or other organs. It shows itself in one of two ways in your body. 1, the tumor is 1 to 2 millimeters deep with a breakdown of your skin, called an ulcer, as shown in the left image. Or 2, the tumor is 2 to 4 millimeters deep without an ulcer, without affecting lymph nodes or any other organs in your body, as shown here on the right of the image. What tests do you need and why are they important? Blood and imaging tests may be done to understand your general health, confirm your diagnosis, and determine your cancer stage. Tissue analysis is also typically done to identify the cancer cell type, which is critical to finding the best treatment option for you. Listen to this overview as needed and then tap Compare My Treatment Options Now. Our unique comparison page will help you understand your FDA-approved treatment options, including who can help you pay for your treatment, where and how each is given, and what side effects you may experience.
So what we did here is we integrated the voice, not just to give the individual a tour, if you will, of what's going on in their body, to also help guide them to the next part of the experience. You like the positioning of the replay button, because all of the research, when you look at any of the research that we've sat through, these patients are completely overwhelmed. And we want to basically acknowledge in small ways that it's okay. We get it that you heard nothing after the doctor said cancer. So just having the replay button there reinforces that, you probably need to listen to it again. And for me, that's an important thing. Some folks might not need it. They might not do it. But for me to reinforce however we can that we've really thought through and understand their situation, is something that's incredibly important.
I love too how the voice explanation complements the imagery. So it's talking about the one on the left, and as you can see on this one on the right. So it's kind of tapping into that multiple ways of processing information and understanding it as we're looking at something. It's not just, reading off text that's irrelevant to maybe the diagram or whatever else we're trying
Exactly.
to
We tried to use it as a little bit of a, when we first did this, quite honestly, I wanted to have the image like animate and be really sort of take someone through it. But for me, it just felt a little bit too complex. So we were looking for a simpler way to do that and to help people retain the information. And so the nice combination of voiceover and imagery for me felt like the right way to approach that.
Absolutely. All right. And so as you were building this out, again, I think it's really interesting to think about how the role of voice can play a part in that information retention. Let's maybe talk a little bit about how that's helping. Let's see, I really enjoy or think this is interesting. You and I were talking earlier about how there's the perspective of here's all the information I'm trying to transmit and put out. But then sometimes we have to pause and think about that listener and how is it that they are going to best receive the information, not even just, cognitively, but as you said, when we have all these emotions in play and people are feeling overwhelmed. And that makes it even harder to retain the things that, we might not be familiar with otherwise and that we're just now having to deal with. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how the voice helps customize that subject matter and appeal to maybe a bit of that emotional state too?
No, absolutely. So, unlike topics like comparing a car or comparing investments or things like that, there's a familiarity with the topic. So, there's already a grounding from, for the individual coming in. What we've seen is that clearly cancer, hopefully, is very new to the individual coming in. So, what we wanted to do wherever we could is use voice and some of the other site elements to build a bit of familiarity connection. And so, whether it's, for breast cancer, for example, we're using a female voice. For prostate cancer, we're using an older male voice. And so one of the things that I liked about the library of avatars and different voices was that I could sort of ebb and flow depending on what I needed to support the patient community that I thought would be coming into the cancer center. And so today we support 13 different cancer centers, but that's 90% of the diagnosed population in the US. And so we looked at the data, the prevalence by age and gender. And then we figured out, okay, what's the best voice that we thought would support that? And of course, we're, testing and learning like a good, like a good platform should always do, continuing to test and learn. Because it's not just about gender, but it's also about tonality. The other thing that, we took advantage of is there's the narrative tone, there's promotional tones, there's different ways that the platform works, and depending on the content that we were using, we would, the voiceover would use a different piece of the platform's capabilities. And so for me, while the complexity of the cancer is the complexity of the cancer, we're going to break that down from a learning process, from a flow perspective as much as we can. But we also wanted to add the layer of, how else can we make it easier? How else can we better connect with the individuals coming to the site and really build that confidence? Like just help them stand up a little bit taller and be more active when they talk to their doctors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about, in terms of using Well Said, for those who aren't familiar, maybe we have a studio tool where Risa can type in the content that she wants to have the voiceover of, for example, that diagram. And then there are, I think we have about 50 different avatars now. So you can choose between the genders, ages, various backgrounds, different accents. We have, British. We've recently added like various regional US accents. And so that really just helps find the right voice for the content. And like you said, there's we have a narration style, a conversational style and a promo style. And yeah, you don't want to be talking about something serious and maybe scary with like a promo voice who's like way too excited,
Yeah,
So it is
yeah.
really important to be able to tailor that sound. Yeah.
I think what's
Um,
really interesting for us so it's a startup. We launched the platform actually end of June, but we started working on this about a year ago. But we were looking for a partner that could support all of our different voice needs. One of the things we found interesting about WellSet is clearly for XpertPatient.com, we needed more of a narrative tone. Um, we we also actually use the platform for a promotional, like a sales video, where we are actively looking for sponsors for the site. If anybody knows anybody, that's always, another conversation. But for that type of content, we went and we used the promotional tone. But more importantly, what it's allowed us to do, I mentioned we're supporting and have content for 90% of the diagnosed community. It's allowed us as a smaller organization be able to scale very quickly. So I actually told Caroline originally, I had a friend who does voiceover. She has an amazing voice. She's British, and everyone thinks, everyone talks about how the British voice is more compelling or more believable. I don't know. There's a lot of conversation around that. But clearly that was not scalable. And from a cost perspective, I couldn't hire people to do voiceovers for me for everything that I envision, everything that I want to do. And so having the flexibility of all the different avatars and the tones and the ease of use within the platform, that was an incredible opportunity and service for me. And as far as using the platform in the studio, to your point, Caroline, I think it was incredible. So I had a lot of the content. We wrote the content, and you saw on each page there's text-based content as well, because some people like to actually, read the content. But we took that content as our foundation and literally copied and pasted into the studio and used it as a starting point to then refine it and create the audio, the voiceovers. And you could see that we tweaked the content so it's a little bit more of a tour-like explanation of the imagery of the medical illustration, but the foundation is still the same.
mhm. Yeah, and I see a comment here from Marina to me, which is talking about how this helps with the burden of the loved one too, because they can understand the information better. We can replay it, we can listen to it twice or three times, and not have to revisit it with the patient necessarily. They can educate themselves in order to help support as well.
Absolutely. I get a lot of questions about caregivers, and clearly the site, it's designed for both patients and caregivers, but the way that we're breaking it down and simplifying it today is certainly supports caregivers. What we're going to be doing in the future is actually adding some really rich share functionality where you can paperclip the pages and the content that you like together to then share with whomever is supporting you. And most folks typically have 2 or 3 people that are their core team from beyond the treatment team that are supporting them. And this way they'll be able to really be on the same page and have better conversations.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the research in this field that really demonstrates the need for more engaging and easy to retain information, especially in this space. One thing I found stunning was in this study in the UK, 15% of the respondents said that they secretly had recorded an appointment. And 77% said they would wish that they had a recording. And then we could see over here, 40 to 80% of medical information is forgotten immediately upon leaving an appointment. That is just incredible. And I know you talk a lot about how, a more engaged patient has better outcomes or reports a better treatment experience just by understanding what's happening better.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we look at, even just the combination of like the imagery and the voiceover, I think some of the latest data shows, you're twice as likely to remember that information. So that's just in general. And so you can only imagine a cancer patient, so someone just diagnosed with cancer, when we do our research and our campaigns and we try to sort of define that moment, and we've used in the past so many different phrases, if you will. It doesn't do it justice, but like, the tornado coming through your house being crushed. Like, it's like no other moment in someone's life. And so how do we take them from that state and help build them back up, which is really what Expert Patient is trying to do. It's giving them the building blocks to come back to the table and be part of the conversation again. It's like this. It's really challenging, quite honestly. And we're working on it every day, every night, because we know where they're at, but we know we can help them. They need to believe in it to a certain extent and be part of the journey with us to help them get there. And so when I talk about Expert Patient, I talk about it that, every time you share the site, you're changing lives, because even if someone comes through for a minute or two, hopefully they're going to, I think I said it before, stand up a little, more confident when they talk to their doctors.
Mm-hmm. Another statistic you shared with me that I think is really interesting is information recall more than doubles from 14% to 32% when a human voice was used rather than synthetic ones. And yes, it's interesting. Well said voices are built from humans. So, we consider the amount of realistic human quality that we have in our voices now, that they are more similar to that than, say, a synthetic voice. But I thought it was interesting. You told me once how you had tried some of the like talking video avatars and that was distracting and not good feedback.
Yeah, I shouldn't get into too much, but yes, I was doing research on the different platforms, and I created the same content using different platforms, as well as an individual doing the voiceover. And the one where we actually had the avatar, like it just wasn't in sync enough. It felt creepy. That was the feedback I got. That's why we were laughing about it. It just wasn't genuine enough. And particularly in the healthcare space and in the cancer arena, really in any arena, you just want to make sure you're sounding genuine. And that was one of the things that came through. But on the promotional side, I also sent the same content as well said's content, and a friend of mine that did voiceovers to my animation team, and they hands down selected the voiceover from the WellSaid platform, and they just thought not just the voice but the pace and the tonality and everything about it just really worked well for what we were trying to accomplish. So that was really interesting. And I didn't tell my friend that she got the axe, but that's what happened.
Interesting. Yes, I can imagine that's a situation where there's no room for, distraction and inauthenticity. Yeah, any of that can really detract from the message. Interesting. Okay, well, let's go into some of the ways that we think people could be using this sort of voice content more in different ways, whether it's a customer experience, a patient experience, really any situation where that retention is so important. Do you mind just kind of talking through some of these points here about what you think voice can add for those experiences?
No, absolutely. So we all go to websites, either from a mobile perspective or on our on our desktops. And if you're not watching a video, there's very few opportunities to engage or to listen to voice content. Podcasts on there have become a big thing, but again, that's like its own thing. I think there's this really nice opportunity to integrate different channels, like we did with the imagery and voice, to really tell a brand story. That way, you can also have different voices tell the story, like literally. So for us, in the pharma realm, we always were hoping to have beyond the brand telling the story. If we could get a healthcare professional to tell the brand story, that's ideal. If we can't get that, the next step would be to have like a human voice of, telling that story. And so again, from a experience perspective, that's just giving someone another option, another way to consume that content. I think it also, from my perspective, it also emotionalizes it. When you're hearing someone's voice tell a story, it's very different than just reading it. And there's good and bad in that, right? I think depending on the situation, you probably want to test into that. But I think for some of the content that's out there, having more voice as an option is a really nice way to emotionalize the story. From a health inequity perspective, for me, this is another, probably my next passion project. One of the things that we're going to be doing for Expert Patient is launching a Spanish version out of the gate. But we're looking for other ways to use voice to just build connection with individuals. And from our perspective, the more we can connect from voice, tone, even regional voice, accent, that's a good thing. Again, it starts to take away even just a little bit more of the complexity associated with a cancer diagnosis, so that people can spend their time focusing on what they need to focus. And then, of course, the gender thing that I talked about earlier, for some folks, it increases the connectivity, the connection. It's more like when we do geo-targeting, we talk about localized content. When we're talking about different conditions, patients and individuals want to hear from people like them. And at a minimum, women typically that have gone through a breast cancer experience want to hear from other women like them. And so wherever we can, and I think wherever any brand has the opportunity, there's this amazing opportunity to use voice and start to elevate the experience that's a little bit flat today. Carolyn, we lost your audio. We lost your voice.
I muted myself.
It's kind of funny that we lost your voice. Come back.
You're right. Yeah. You would think 2 years into Zoom life, we would have the mute button figured out, but not always.
It's all good.
Yeah. Anyway, I was saying, when you were talking about breaking down the health inequities, I think that's a really untapped, thing that voice can help with, because as you said, we can add more accents. I know WellSaid is working to add more languages, and as soon as we can, get them ready. But being able to reach those audience, not just in the one format, in the website that is put out by WebMD or whatever, like you said, that can be a little overwhelming, but to be able to reach all these niche audiences with a voice that is authentic to them and that they can really identify with. I think that's a really unique, interesting thing about voice.
I do too. And I think, with Expert Patient, we have the opportunity, for example, that like I never had on a lot of, pharma brand sites and things like that. Even advocacy is just not where they typically will spend their time to try different innovations and different approaches to learning and education. The nice thing about Expert Patient, and please, if you have feedback, please reach out to me. We are learning and improving every day, because we just feel that, there's this amazing opportunity to help new patients every day, and anything we can do to help it be more relatable is something it's core to who we are.
And speaking of that, Risa, how can people reach you if they have questions or want to offer feedback about the site?
Sure. I will, we can post my email in the chat. That's totally fine. And I'd love to hear it. Unfortunately, everybody has a story in this space, but I'm sure there's a lot of great technologies that I'm not even aware of, or approaches that people have thought through that might help this type of community. The other thing is, from a platform perspective, we're tackling oncology because I figured it's the hardest. If I can build a platform that can help cancer patients because of the complexity and the number of treatments and just all of the package, all of it, then that's amazing. And the idea is that we can then in time stand up a platform for the community with heart conditions, with diabetes, and the other disease states pretty quickly.
Wow, that's really exciting. I think the really unique thing about Expert Patient, and I've talked to you about this, is the fact that it is unbiased. It is well researched. You have a team of experts, but it's not from the perspective of a pharmaceutical company or any special interest in the healthcare field.
Yeah, I do want to, since I am talking to a larger group, it is based on cancer.gov and all the FDA approved treatment options, as well as, excuse me, National Cancer Council. So there's NCCN guidelines that also guide all of the content on the site. It is ultimately going to be sponsored by pharma brands, just so that we can continue to grow. But even on that front, we're super transparent. We're only going to have brands that are related to the specific cancer center on that particular cancer center, as well as, being really open that it's basically being sponsored by this particular brand so that we can bring this experience to more patients.
Hmm. Yeah, that's helpful to know. All right. Well, if anyone has some questions that they want to put in the chat area for Risa, I had a couple more that I'm going to use while we're waiting if anyone has questions there. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how, what do you think is the barrier to people using voice more? Why hasn't this been adopted more? Do you think people are just relying more on video content, or I wonder what's stopping more people from using voice the way you are?
I just wonder if people haven't really tested it as much. I mean, clearly it's much less expensive to use a voice experience versus a video experience. The production costs alone there's no comparison. And I'm also surprised with Alexa and all the voice tools that have become recently available. There hasn't been more voice integration into the overall experience. I think we're going to see it shift now with platforms like yourselves, because you've made it so easy and so scalable that if we can let people know and see how it's used right through use cases like Expert Patient, there'll be more and more uptick on voice. Because I remember I went to the first voice conference I think it was like in Newark, like years ago. And it was pretty, people were really curious about it. It's become a really big thing. But I think people are still struggling with the use cases and the impact it's going to have, right? You got to use it in the right way. Because the marketers, they need to make decisions, right? They need to make different investment decisions. At this point, video is it's a very proven thing. Voice over X, Y, or Z. Unfortunately, it hasn't been proven out from an ROI perspective. And so we just need to help them understand the impact.
Yeah, I'm all for that. In fact, we wrote a really interesting case study about Expert Patient with Risa, which I will include in the replay email so that everyone can read a more in-depth, how you integrated the process or studio into your work process and all of that. But yeah, you're right. It's such a much more affordable and time efficient way to get content out as opposed to video, which, we have a lot of customers who talk about the visual used to be half of the time and the voiceover was half the time. Now with Well Said, we can do the voiceover in a minute and then all of this time is spent just manipulating the visual portion of it. So
right. That was
that's
actually one
really,
of the things I was going to mention about the studio platform. So for us, some of the terms were super complicated and we weren't sure we could use the platform because of chemotherapy and immunotherapy and even some of the brand names and things like that. But with the tool and being able to customize some of the language and really sound things out phonetically, we were able to overcome that challenge and just really make it a smooth experience. But from a voice perspective, the other thing is as we start to talk about being more personalized and tailoring to different communities, to do that through video is unbelievably costly. Like there's just no way most brands are going to invest in, especially as you get to smaller populations, which you really need to get to really resonate in video for every small population. Right, like we're not like when you talk about, we're not talking about like the Asian community. Like there's hundreds of communities within the Asian community. Like it's super complex and people deserve content that's relevant to them. And the only way to do that is to find tools like Well Said to help you sort of bring that to light, to activate against that.
absolutely something scalable. And also, I know too, like as new information comes out, if you need to update your material, that's can be a real nightmare with a voice, traditional voiceover in a recording studio, or, video is a much bigger investment to change anything, update, add new information later.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of like the video content, like we have expert XP studios and are working on some animated, like some video content, but we're using it in a way that we're going to be able to marry it with the voiceover from Well Said, so that it is in fact a much shorter design and development time.
Hmm. Okay, well, I'm going to give everyone just a minute to add any questions. In the meantime, again, you can find either of us at, I obviously am at wellsaidlabs.com here. And Risa, we shared the URL for Expert Patient, but I will send out the case study with our replay as well as Risa's contact information. We really, I mean, I have thought many times since finding out about Expert Patient, like the next time I hear of anybody I know who's had a cancer diagnosis, I'm sending it immediately because it is just such a clear, customized way to understand things, even just for me, for my loved ones. So, yeah, absolutely. Share it, look at it, offer your feedback. Risa, is there anything else coming up with Expert Patient? Any places we should be watching for you on other webinars or podcasts or anything like that you'd like
Uh,
to?
no, we are right now, we are working on release 2, which is going to be really exciting. We're going to be integrating some more of the sharing capabilities, which is critical. And we're actually exploring, actually I should say exploring, we're working on Expert Patient XP Pro, which is going to be for healthcare professionals, where the site will be basically set up as more like a counseling tool so that the healthcare professionals can work with patients in a co-browse mode, I guess. I don't want to give away two-way. We're still working too much. We're still working through what it's going to look like, which I think is going to be really incredible. And it's really focusing on the nurses, the NPs, the unsung heroes a lot of the time in this space, and giving them access to something that they've never had access to before. So we're working on that, as well as we are going to create like a My Expert Patient experience so that people can be more supported throughout their journey, as opposed to just at the very beginning of the journey, which is going to be coming soon. So very excited about that too.
That is exciting. I can't wait to see that as well. Wonderful. Well, I don't see a lot of questions coming in, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you so much for joining me today and telling us about all of your experience and knowledge in this space. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. And thank you everyone at Well Said.
All right. Bye, everybody.